Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me with our Verbal Reasoning Parent Workshop for 2024. I'm lucky enough to have my sidekick, Louise Swan, with me as well to talk to you about all things verbal reasoning. And that's actually going to be my opening gambit, is to actually ask you what you think verbal reasoning actually is. Could you define verbal reasoning? Now, we do have a chat feed, so please feel free in the chat feed to type what you think verbal reasoning actually is. What does it involve? Some of you may well have had siblings go through the 11 plus. Some of you may not have. Some of you may not have or may not be so aware of the 11 plus subjects. But verbal reasoning, which does appear in both Reading Boys, the Bucks exam, the Slough Consortium, what is verbal reasoning? I thought that might be quite a good way to get started. So please don't be shy. In the chat feed, please type away what you think verbal reasoning is. Louise and I, before the call started, had a little chat about our own sort of ideas around verbal reasoning and what we sort of how we would define it. But what do you think verbal reasoning is? Don't be shy. Brilliant. Someone has gone for it and kicked us off. So brilliant. Thank you very much. And they've said understanding ideas and concepts using words. Brilliant. Word association. Someone's put grammar. Knowledge of vocabulary. Fantastic. Meanings of words. I think probably what we'll be able to do with these ideas is maybe merge a lot of them together as well on what verbal reasoning is. Ability to understand and solve problems using words. What we always find interesting about verbal reasoning is that, yes, of course, it does involve vocabulary and words. And we're going to be having a look at a lot of word-related questions this afternoon. But it doesn't just solely rely on a knowledge of words. In actual fact, under GL assessment, there are also number questions in verbal reasoning. Things like number sequences, balanced equations, middle number is another one. Letter sums is another one involving numbers. So it does also involve numbers as well as words and also codes as well. Now, for the first time this year, we've made the decision to actually separate out our workshops a little bit more. So we used to do a verbal reasoning workshop based on vocabulary, on codes, on all the number questions, and it was a bit of a beast, really. We were going through all the different question types. So we decided this year that we will focus purely on the word-related questions today, but in our next workshop, we will do the code-related ones as a separate workshop. We just thought that makes more sense. But all of those people who have typed in the chat are absolutely right. Verbal reasoning is all about understanding words, solving problems using words and letters, and also just being aware as well that it's all about developing their vocabulary skills as well, which will support them in school just as much as it will for something like the 11 plus. And again, before we came on to this call, Louise and I were discussing a little bit about how certainly these students with us now, whether they be in year 4 or year 5, have been impacted by COVID, I'm sure, in terms of their phonic knowledge and building up their vocabulary and learning new words. And it's for us, obviously, to give them the best start in terms of understanding the vocabulary and building up those word skills. And that isn't something that happens overnight. It takes a long time to develop vocabulary, and hence why I think children obviously who join us in year 4 building up that foundations, but of course even starting in September for year 5, then actually that still does give them enough time to develop that vocabulary. Lou, is there anything else you want to talk about in terms of what verbal reasoning is and what it involves?
I think all of the answers are part of the answer because it's such a big field. You could have a very long definition. I would have said it is about putting how we put letters together to make words and words together to make sentences, and how we do it in order to allow ourselves to, as effectively as possible, communicate and understand the language that we use. If you think about different languages, you know, there's different rules of how the words are put together. So it's really a deep understanding of how words are used.
Thanks, Lou. And I think when we get into some of the question types with you today, you will see that lots of words, for example, have multiple meanings, and it's knowing those different meanings. And we tend to find with the 11 plus, it's more slightly obscure. So, you know, if I said the word badger to you, the immediate thought with the word badger is, oh, the black and white animal. But what about to nag or to pester? And I always think of words like that. And I think, yeah, that's what the 11 plus is also testing our students. It's about understanding words with multiple meanings. And we'll have a look at some question types that are very directly linked to that concept as well. So what I'm going to do now, I'm actually going to share my screen with you. I hope you can all see this. Now, what we've done, hopefully you've all received it. If you haven't, please let our office know. But we have sent out a booklet for the people that signed up for this session today. And we will very much be going through that booklet, but what we've done, we've kind of chopped it up and put it into a series of slides. So that's why it looks the kind of way that it does, but hopefully it'll be easy for you to follow, and you've got something maybe tangible yourself to look at as we go through the slides. So what we're going to start with really actually just a little bit of an introduction also into the grammar schools themselves. So as you probably know, we support children for grammar schools in Buckinghamshire, and that is a list of the 13 grammar schools in Bucks. We also support children for Kendrick, and they are now under GL assessment, and Reading Boys. Reading Boys a few years ago now moved to a company called Future Stories, and that did involve including things like creative writing, but they also have what they call English vocabulary as well. Yeah, I do see someone writing on the screen. If you cannot do that, it will be certainly when we do things on the screen and see things on the screen. I'd rather you didn't annotate. So I know we may well have some students with us today, which is lovely, and thank you very much for coming along. But yes, if you can avoid writing on the screen, that will really help. And of course, the Slough Consortium. So the 4 grammar schools in Slough, that's Langley, Hershall, St Bernard's and Upton Court. The children do one sitting for all 4 of those grammar schools, and they would do a separate sitting if they were going for Kendrick or Reading School. Buckinghamshire, it's one sitting for all of those. It's one of the only local authorities that has something called an opt-out system. So if you don't want your child to do the 11 plus, you need to inform the local authority you don't want them to do it. Otherwise, you're automatically entered into to do that. And that pass mark is 121. That's the standardization that children need to get. Now, I'm not going to bore you this afternoon with standardizations and deviation curves and things like that, but just so you're aware, it is the child's age related to their raw score. So the older the child, the better they need to perform. So we will talk more to you about standardizations as the year goes on. But yeah, a little bit of background on the grammar schools that we predominantly support children for. We do have interest in other local authorities, but generally we sort of surface where grammar schools are more prevalent, and hence why Buckinghamshire is a place where there are a lot of grammar schools. I think the most condensely populated local authority with grammar schools is Kent. There are 38 grammar schools left in Kent, but only 164 left in the land. So at their peak, I believe, back in the sort of 60s and 70s, there was about 1,700 grammar schools. So they really have shrunk in size. So what do we ask of you this afternoon? Well, we would ask you please to participate in answering some of the questions. We sometimes feel you can relate more to what your child's going through and understand how the question types are constructed if you have a go as well. So please feel free with scratch bits of paper or typing it into the chat to have a go at some of these questions. One of the things we didn't talk about at the beginning when we were sort of defining verbal reasoning is I do very much see a lot of these word-related questions like games, like puzzles. And we do treat them like that. And I think it's a good way to introduce it to the children. Certainly, if you get involved with some of the question types, one particular one which always stands out to me, which is where you have to find a hidden 4-letter word. Well, you could actually do that in your reading books. You don't need any actual questions. You could just ask children on a page to find a hidden 4-letter word between other words. So there's lots of different ways, and we'll hopefully this afternoon give you lots of those suggestions as well.
Can I just interrupt there, Chris, and say
Of
I
course,
do a
Lou.
lot of that when I teach the children spelling techniques, how to learn spellings. And one of the techniques I say is look for shy words that are hiding inside other words. It's a really good way of doing spellings. I think I teach them about 5 different techniques, and children tend to only use one technique if they're not taught to use a variety, but that's a really good activity for them to do.
Thanks, Lou. And I think you're so right. That kind of being a detective and finding 3-letter words within another word is a brilliant way, because that is one question type as well, which children have to do. They have to find a missing 3-letter word. So just building up those letter patterns and that understanding of spellings is so, so important. So what we're going to do to start with, we've got a little bit of I guess it's a bit like a Q&A really. So we've got a question. We're going to give you an answer, but these are questions we often get asked every year about verbal reasoning. So Louise and I are going to sort of take it in turns. I'll start with the first one, just around the breakdown of verbal reasoning, but then I will hand over to Lou to tackle the second question. So one of the questions we often get asked is, what percentage of the GL exam comprises of verbal reasoning? So what we tend to find with the breakdown of the subject areas is that verbal comprehension and SPAG represent 50% of the exam. So one of the papers that your child will do, so of course they have non-verbal and maths in the other one, one of the papers will comprise of an English comprehension with spelling, punctuation and grammar, and that's all one section. And then they do verbal reasoning as a separate section. And it represents about 50% of the exam, and then the other 2 subjects comprise of 25%. So if you like, it is very much dominated by vocabulary related questions. And one of the things we will be able to do this year is feed back to you about the kind of questions that came up this year. We don't obviously get to see the paper, unfortunately, but what we do get is some really good feedback from our pupils around the question types that appeared, which is obviously really useful. We never want to be too predictable, because that's always dangerous. But for many, many years, for verbal reasoning and GL assessment, there's been about 21 different types of questions. And as we talked about earlier, those involve both words, codes, and number related ones as well. Okay, so we'll be going through the word related ones. Got the biggest question of the lot, Lou.
Haven't I?
Number 2.
I was just jotting a few ideas down. I think the first thing I'd say is try to see it for this year as a whole family thing. Try yourself to use as many words as you can to broaden your own vocabulary and drop them in. I start that when I used to teach in year 1, and I started trying it out down at that age, and I used to throw in the word discombobulated and say I'm so discombobulated, and then start looking for things and say, and they children immediately say, what does that mean? And I'd say, well, what do you think it means? Because we want to encourage them to use context, to understand words from context. And it was amazing the amount of people who came to me at the end of a week or even a month of, what's this word that they keep using? But you know, try and use that as often as you can. Some families like to choose, say, 4 words or 5 words a week, maybe blue tap them around the house and challenge each other. How often can you use that in context? Can you use that word? Do you know the antonym? So little incidental things so that it's ongoing, rather than sitting down and say, we're going to do some verbal reasoning, being aware of words and games you can play. Word ping pong is a good one, where you say, right, my word's tired. Can you fire me back another word? So they say exhausted, and you fire back shattered, and they fire back done in, and so on until you stop, you can't do any more, and the last person to speak scores a point. You can have a point system or something, but you don't have to. You can just do it incidentally. When you're in the car, is good. If you're on a long journey or something, you can do things. There's lots you can do incidentally. The obvious answer is reading, but I think to help the children, a good way is for you to challenge yourself to read to your child 2 or 3 times a week if you can, and to choose a book that's a little bit above their reading level, so that you read the book, and that book should have 2, maybe 3 words on a page that they might not be sure of. You'll be able to judge the level of the book in that way, and ask them to just interrupt you if there's a word that they don't know, and maybe just underline it faintly in pencil if you own the book, and then come back to it later and see if you can guess from the context. So reading, reading, reading. The word and meaning book that we use in class is absolutely vital. And at this point in term, especially for children who are new, I'm really hot on, have you got your word and meaning book on the desk during the lesson? And if we come across words the children don't know, I'm expecting them to put the word in. I'm looking out for them to put it in. We don't often have chance in class to for them to write a definition. I'll give them a different definition, but there's no time to write it. So what I do is I say, ask your mum and dad if they will revisit with you the words that don't have a definition, so they're already visiting it once. And if you write it for them, it's really a lot of work for children. And I think just doing those little jobs, like saying, I'll write it for you when we're discussing it, it just relieves them a little bit and makes them feel that they're not on their own when they're doing it. So I would strongly recommend that. As we go on, I remind them periodically, but it's very interesting to notice children who continually use it. It's always there, and they're not told. They don't have to be told. Other children who have to be told to do it. So keep an eye that book is filling, revisit with them. I don't know if some of you use the infamous boxes of cards. We might see those later, mightn't we, Chris?
That's it, Lou. Yeah, the flashcards and things.
Yeah, flashcards. My advice with flashcards is, if you have got them, try spinning it around, and instead of you asking your child what a word means, they choose a word and ask you what it means, and they have the fun of watching you struggle to define it, but define it you do. And it takes the stress off them, but they're still doing the same activity, and they really enjoy it because they're watching you trying to guess the word. So they read the definition, you get the word. Yeah, there's lots of other things. I don't think I've missed any of the main ones, Chris, but
No, Lou, no, fantastic. And can I just reiterate again about the word and meaning book, because what a valuable tool it becomes, certainly nearer the exam, where over the summer months, you very much find yourself using it as a revision aid. So you can go back through the letters and sort of say, oh, you know, you recorded this down. Do you remember what this means? And it's sort of, I suppose, it captures all the words that children potentially throughout the year may not know. So I can really echo that point from Lou about, you know, do use it. But you writing words in there as well is a great tip.
Sorry, Chris. The children are never asked in the 11 plus to define a letter. A word, sorry. So they need to be familiar with the word. And if you keep visiting it, they will be familiar. And when they see it in some sort of context of a question, the familiarity will often help them. So it's don't worry about actually them having to have being able to write themselves a definition. As long as they understand what the word means, that suffices for the purposes of the 11 plus.
Thanks,
Somebody
Lou.
asked me, sorry, one last thing, Chris, before I forget. Somebody asked me on Saturday how I get a child to remember. And what I do is I build a story around the word. So, for example, I have had a child once who came across the word stubborn and didn't know what it meant. So I said, have you ever been in a supermarket when a mum is trying to put their 2-year-old back in the pushchair? And the 2-year-old goes rigid, and they won't bend in the middle, and they won't get in the pushchair. And I say, that's being stubborn when you won't do something that you ought to do. And then later, when they meet the word again, and they ask you again, I've forgotten what stubborn means. It happens quite often. What does it mean? I say, baby in a pushchair. Oh, yes, when you won't do. So try and build a word, a story around the word, and that helps them a lot more than trying to actually learn a definition.
Thanks, Lou. Just while you were giving those helpful tips, we just had a question within the chat about if English is not necessarily your first language, how you ensure that the pronunciation of some of those words is correct. And I can imagine that can be quite frustrating sometimes, but the suggestion which has been put in the chat by the parent has actually been about using things like pronounce.com, or using Google. I noticed on Google recently when there was a word I wasn't quite sure exactly how to pronounce, and went on there, and it actually shows the mouth and the mouth moving. And then it breaks it down phonetically how the word should be spoken. So there's so many, things that are quite advanced now in terms of technology and making sure that you know how those words pronounce. So yes, keep going. That is acceptable. It's a great way of doing it. I don't know, Lou, if you've got any other ideas around kind of pronunciation tips.
Yeah, I think if it was me, I'd just jot them down and then ask somebody how they pronounce it, because of course we have got the problem anyway that I say grass, you say grass. So, but I understand what you mean when you first meet a word. I would jot it down and don't be afraid to ask somebody.
Absolutely. Yeah. Scone and scone, Lou, most definitely. Number 3 is my question, and it is, what suitable games can be used to improve vocabulary? I always tell this story, but I have one claim to fame in my life, and I was Southwest Scrabble champion. Not many people know that. I do keep it sort of under wraps a little bit, but it was something that I certainly did love playing as a child. My mum and I used to play Scrabble. Most Sundays we used to have a game, and I really did enjoy it. And I think it certainly did really help me build my vocabulary. I ended up, when I did the Scrabble tournaments, having to learn a lot of little 2-letter words. But if you know about Scrabble and the way that it works, if you can actually put down 2 or 3 words at the same time, you're a lot more likely to get more points. So we learned a lot of little words, which really helped me certainly with my Scrabble playing. But the question is about games, and there are lots of word games out there now. Bananagrams is one we use at Teach It Right a lot. We also use a game called Whiz Match, which again is great fun to pair up synonyms and antonyms. And I do believe that if children are having fun at the same time, they are more likely to retain the words and learn the words. I know certainly even with Scrabble now, and Scrabble for me is actually played on the iPad. I do play Scrabble on the iPad rather than on a board. I don't think it's the same. I don't feel it's such a nice way, but there are so many games out there online which are really engaging, really good fun to use. And we can certainly send you a list of those games. There are some in the appendix in the document that we sent you. Yeah, absolutely. Please try and draw on those word games with your children. Really, really important. There's another one that we use. Word. I was going to call it word wheel, but it's not quite word wheel. There's one where you have a strip of letters, and then you have to spell a word, and you move the letters according to how you spell it. And if you can get those letters kind of off the board, you get more points. It will come to me as we go through this afternoon. But yeah, a really good fun game to play at home as well.
Someone in the chat, Chris, is asking and saying it would be helpful to have a list of recommendations for books that children of this age enjoy.
Absolutely,
Shall
Lou.
I deal with that now? Yeah.
Well, actually, we do have a recommended reading list at Teach It Right. Our resource lady in our head office, a lady called Suzanne Perrett, her sole job is to make sure that we are well equipped and children have the right books, etc. But she's actually compiling at the moment. We have a list of books, but what we thought might be quite nice would be actually to have the front cover and a synopsis. And she is ploughing through that list as we speak. So we will get that out to you very, very soon. I'm sure maybe even before half term, we'll be able to release that to you. So please don't feel that we need to list any books to you now. I think Louise's point earlier, I think, is a real key thing there about reading. Make sure you're also reading the right kind of books. I think
I always say, don't I, Chris, that children should have 2 books on the go. One is what I call their easy peasy book that they can read with ease, enjoy the story, go to bed late at night, tired, read a few chapters, enjoy it, go to sleep. The other one is what I call the challenge book, and that's the book I was talking about, where the level of vocabulary is such that there'd be 2 or 3 words on the page that they'd not be very familiar with. There might be 1 or 2 sentences that they have to reread in order to understand that sentence, because that will help them with their grammar skills. And that's the one that you share, that you take 2 or 3 times a week or whatever time you can manage. And sometimes you read to them, and sometimes they might like to read a little bit to you, and that gives you a good idea of judging it. Don't flog a book that they're not enjoying. If a child's not enjoying a book, I will often say, okay, let's leave that till you're a little bit older. I don't say, oh, let's throw it away and never look at it again. I would say, look at it when you're a little bit older. It may be that it's a bit hard, and just read a little bit of books until you find one that you can settle in. And there is, of course, my book club. You could come to that.
Thanks, Lou.
Okay.
Lou, do you want to just talk a little bit about the dictionaries? Obviously, we know we can't use them in exams, but just a little bit of thought around dictionaries and how to use them.
Yes, again, I think with dictionaries, it's something that you can help the children with. Actually look it up for them and discuss it with them. Because the problem I find is when you say to a child, go and look in the dictionary, 9 times out of 10, the dictionary will use words that they don't understand to explain the word they don't understand. And children get really frustrated then and just don't bother to use dictionary. Some people love it and they whip it out at the beginning of their lesson, but I'd say that would be about 30%. The rest keep it a quiet, hidden thing in their bag because it's quite stressful, I think, if they look up a word. So do support them with that. Encourage them to use a dictionary. But ask them if they don't understand what the definition is they're given, to ask you and help them with that. And I'm afraid there's so many ways you can help them. It's a busy year for you too.
The last question here just says, where shall we record new words? We've really already talked a little bit about that in terms of the word and meaning book and keeping a nice record of the unfamiliar words. Please don't feel that when you write in that word and meaning book, you need to have very lengthy definitions, sometimes just a synonym or a short little phrase. It doesn't need to be arduous. I think what's really important for children is that they enjoy that recording process. You don't want them kind of moaning that they've got to copy out a really lengthy definition. I think what can be quite useful as well is to actually generate separate lists. So having a list, for example, of unusual 4-letter words, or having a list of compound words, having a list of antonyms and synonyms. We do provide those, of course, at Teach It Right. Having a list of words with multiple meanings. And that can be a nice way as well of it not feeling quite so overwhelming that it's just a huge mass of words, that you can actually split them off into little categories. One of the reasons when we teach our spelling lists, we put them into themed words is for that very reason, that we know if children are learning words with ABLE and IBLE, they're actually more likely to retain those words and remember them because they've been given a certain category. And the same would be for something like shun endings, TION, SION. Again, learning them together is a far better approach. But I think what you will find across the year is that a lot of these words that we do teach them in the lessons and we come across in things like quizzes and things like that come up again. I had great fun on Friday putting some words back into the quiz that the children actually found difficult the previous week. Did they remember them the next time round? And actually, I think for the majority of children, they did, which was super. We've also got a few questions again in the chat about reading books and suggestions on that, which is great. So please keep that dialogue going and asking those questions. Question 6, what is the best approach when using word lists with my child, Lou?
I think I'll reiterate again, making stories up. Little competitions again, I've already said, where they test you rather than you testing them. They're still dealing with the same material, but the pressure's off a little bit. Highlighting, really important. I always encourage my children, if the books belong to them, and they're not, obviously I teach them the difference between a beautiful book that you're going to keep forever because it's so lovely, and we don't, but if the book belongs to you and it's a paperback, you've picked it up in a book sale or at a charity shop, have a pencil and underline things so that it doesn't interrupt your reading, but you can go back and visit that word and just occasionally help them and say, can you guess from the context? So that's the main thing, that they're trying to understand from the context what a word means.
Thank you, Louise. Right, what we're going to do now, everyone, we're actually going to sort of delve into our question types and talk to you about how we would suggest children approach them, give you a sort of a sense of what some of them look like. I will also put some links in the chat as well for some free material which you may well want to look at as well. So we're going to start with synonyms, otherwise known as closest in meaning. It is a very popular question type, but interesting actually this year, certainly in the Slough test and the Bucks exam, there weren't any. Now, that's not to say that next year they won't put them back in. So we, again, don't want to be too predictable. But what does it involve? Well, children are given a word. They then have to find a word that means the same. Sometimes it's presented where they have 3 words on the left, 3 words on the right, and they choose one from either side, but they have to be closest in meaning. Now, as a question writer myself, I know the kind of tricks that examiners play. And of course, one of the things that they may do is they may put opposite meanings in. So children go for the opposite rather than the closest. Perhaps when they're choosing the words, they don't actually come from the same word group. So that's important that children remember. Also, obviously, words can come from different word groups. Take a word like drive. Drive could be a noun, it could be a verb. But do need to remember when they're choosing those words, they do need to be from the same word group. And of course, the greatest, and Louise was talking about this earlier, putting words into context. If the child can put that word into the same sentence and it works and it means the same, they're very likely, of course, to get it right. Now, what we've got here, we've just got an example at the bottom of this slide where it says rigid, and they have to find the word that means the same. What we tend to find with a lot of questions is children may not know every single word within that question. Does that mean that they cannot get it right? No, not at all. So if I just look at that question there, harnessed, not an easy word for a child to know. Biased may be a word they've not necessarily come across. But if they can work out that rigid and stiff mean the same, and if we go back to Lou's stubborn child in the pushchair, feeling very stiff, feeling very rigid, and we had a conversation about this earlier in terms of athletes and gymnasts looking very rigid in their approach. So again, just giving that word some life. I think that's one of the most important things that I feel with vocabulary. It's not just a word on a page. When could I use it? When would I hear it? And I think that's a big part of vocabulary building. One of the things we have been using throughout this first block is actually this Synonyms and Antonyms book by a lady called Christine Draper. And Christine Draper is a secondary teacher. She has invigilated various exams over the years and compiled a book with lots of words from past 11 plus exam papers. So a brilliant book, challenging. And I know it mentions reference, of course, to CM style. Do remember, of course, with synonyms and antonyms, it doesn't really matter in terms of the exam board. It's all about just developing that vocabulary around those two. So
Chris, could I add something about that?
Of course, Lou.
Because I absolutely love that book. I think it's really good. What I do is, you have that one where you've got a lot of words and they have to put them either in either column.
Yeah.
To show I can't remember how it works, but what I do is I don't, again, get them to laboriously write the words. I don't see any value. What I do is I get them to take a pencil and just do a little tick, a pencil tick over the words they know, and a little cross over the ones they don't. And then you can rub that out and use that book again. And you can use it more than one time, just to keep checking that it hasn't been forgotten. So little tricks like that can save you a lot of time and a lot of money. A lot of children will enjoy playing the game, well, doing the work, but the laboriousness of having to write all the words, I think if they were learning spelling or something, it has a place. But if you're doing it for the vocabulary, I think that's a much better method.
Thanks, Lou. And I think the other thing, which obviously with closest in meaning, which we want to ensure children are aware of that they can do, and we talk about this right the way through the year, is kind of that process of elimination where you can rule out the wrong ones and maybe you might be left with the right answer, even if you're not quite sure on what all those words mean. So just to sort of explain that a little bit more, if, for example, flexible we know would be the opposite, so we would rule it out. And again, we would go through the options, rule out the ones we know it can't be. We might be left with 2, but a 50-50 chance is far better than a 20% chance. So, sometimes using that as a strategy can be really useful. And certainly in things like non-verbal reasoning, where you rule out the wrong ones, hopefully to leave you with the right answer. What you'll find within the booklet is the kind of strategies that we'd ask the children to use. So, for example, making sure in these questions they're reading every word, thinking about, well, what does it mean? Where have I heard that before? Not being too impulsive either. Sometimes what will happen is a child will go for an answer and then they'll think about it a little bit longer and they'll say, oh no, that can't be right. It's got to be this word. So it's being considered, which I think is really, really important. One of the things I'm going to put into the chat for you now is a website. And it's been around for years, ever since I've been doing the 11 plus, since around 2003 when I first started doing things with Teach It Right. There was a website called freerice.com. www.freerice.com, and I've always found it to be brilliant. Great fun for the children. They if they get a question right, it's quite novel really. They get sort of grains of rice that go into a bowl, and it is a food program. That's the whole sort of concept behind it, but brilliant for their vocabulary. So if you haven't explored that before with your other children, or you're new to the 11 plus, www.freerice.com, great fun for synonyms. What you will find at the back of your booklet is a series of questions that you are more than welcome to have a go at. I don't think today we've necessarily got time to go through every single question, but maybe we could just have a little look maybe at the top 5 here. So you are more than welcome to type your answers in the chat if you want to. So 1 to 5, can you work out which word is a synonym to the word on the left? So just have a look at those. We'll just do the top 5 questions. If there's any children around, they may want to just have a little go themselves as well. I think there are. Just again, there's some people in the chat making some wonderful suggestions about creating word lists, using things like Excel to put the words into sentences. Fantastic. If that works for your child, go for it. Great. Sounds a really good method. And I appreciate it's not necessarily writing it down, but that's, I think, utilizing technology like that is great. So okay, shall we have a little look at these 5? Again, feel free if you want to type answers into the chat and beat me to the punch, you're more than welcome to. So first word is spring, and if we look along there, we've got carve, bound, lever, line, and spiral. And of course, spring, if you think of springing as in moving along, it would be bound. So to bound along, to spring along, if you think of a dog in a park. Then we've got clutch would be grasp, as in to hold on to something, to grasp it, to clutch it. I know we had that in the Year 4 quiz the other day, which was great. Hinder is impede. You put someone off something. If you hinder them, you impede them. And interestingly, on that question, you'll see the word assist. And of course, that would be the opposite. And that's a prime example of how children might go for that because they've forgotten they're doing closest. You tend to find if children have got 7 or 8 questions, the latter ones, that's maybe where that can happen, where they can flip from closest to antonyms. Quota, let's have a little look in the chat. Yeah, someone's beaten me to it. Well done. It, of course, is an allowance. And then obey is comply. What we like about vocabulary, certainly within the 11 plus, is these words are challenging. They're not always going to be on the tip of the tongue, but it's also about exploring that vocabulary. So, for example, if I came to comply, I might talk about compliant as well, and what other words you can actually make from those words. Is that the root word? And I think that's really a really good conversation to be had with children about how you can make words from other words, but also hopefully this develops their vocabulary along the way.
And also how nouns and verbs, you can use a word to make a noun or a verb. That's something children find really difficult.
Thanks, Lou. Yeah, yeah. Now, Reading Boys, if there are parents here who are looking at Reading Boys, they have a closest in meaning style of question, which is very similar to the CEM one, where they actually have to insert letters. So they have to work out what letters have been removed, what have been taken out. I don't think it really matters what exam board you're going for. I think these are just great for children, just to help them with their spellings. We talked earlier about making it as gamey as we can. These are good fun. So I've got 10 there. And it would be lovely if you could give these ones a little go as well. Thank you very much, those people in the chat who had a good go at typing those answers out and doing incredibly well. So well done. So have a go at those. See if you can work out. I would say probably number 2 is the most tricky. So well done if you get that one. And I would say, which other one? I'd say probably this one. I'm talking about a child's perspective now, but maybe in terms of spelling. Again, thank you very much for giving up your time this afternoon to join us. We do appreciate it. We will be running future workshops on different subject areas as well. Did mention non-verbal, English, maths, exam technique. But we have decided this year, if you're coming along and you're hearing us talk a lot about words, to separate out the code questions, the number questions, against the word related ones. We wouldn't have time in a 2-hour period to get through all of those different verbal reasoning question types. There's just too many. So we thought it might be better for our sanity if we split it out a little bit and make sure we split it out. Okay, right. Let's go down through what we've got in the chat. Is a nice a nice sort of range of responses coming through. So let's just quickly go down through these and see what you've got. So number 1, lots of you put this in the chat, of course, would be leave, abandon, to leave. Now, this was tricky, I thought, this one, but lots of you getting it right in the chat. Well done. Abolish, scrap. Abrupt, sudden. So in order to get the marks for these questions, the children do need to obviously spell them right as well. It's not just a case of knowing the word. They've got to be able to spell those correctly. Ailing is sick. Adapt, always think about an adapter. Change. Accuse is blame. Achieve is attain. Attach. Don't think I saw it in the chat. Some of you getting that one. Let me have a little look. Yes, I did. Fasten. To fasten your seatbelt. Attach. Author, writer. And I think most of you spotted that was trophy. Well done. Thank you for giving those ones a quick go. So Reading boys, that's very applicable. GL assessment don't have a question type quite like that, but certainly the Reading boys students would do. But as I say, I don't think it matters what exam board you're going for, just great fun.
I think it's a good example, Chris, of not just testing vocabulary, but they are testing there if you know how letters combine in words, because if you don't know the words, you can have a little look and think, well, you know, what could come before a P, or what could come, would it be a vowel or a consonant there, and so on. So they're
Exactly.
testing far more than just your knowledge of antonyms and spelling, of course.
Of
They're
course,
testing.
yeah. So Lou, over to you. So antonyms is the next question type.
Okay, so as Chris has already said, one of the biggest problems with antonyms and synonyms is that the children forget which they're doing. So we always recommend that halfway through they just keep double checking that they are doing the right one. The process is really exactly the same as synonyms. So select the word that means opposite to the word on the left. So an example is abundance. If the children don't know that word, obviously it's going to be really difficult. But I always say to them, just try and think, can you think of a situation where you've heard that word? Have you, sometimes when they read the options, it does help them. But same as before, just go abundance, assistance. Does that word sound as if it means the same? Abundance, affluence, abundance, scarcity, abundance, void, and abundance, remainder. If you do know what the word abundance is, you can put it in a sentence and see if the others fit, if you're guessing. So it's exactly the same strategy as before. The answer, of course, is scarcity, but they will put a synonym as an opportunity. So it's really, really important that they're aware of that, especially when they start it.
Thanks, Lou. I think this might be quite a good opportunity just to talk to you a little bit about the way that the exam is laid out. So again, apologies if I'm telling you things that you already know, but it is important to recognise that there is a separate multiple choice sheet for children. So they transfer their answers over to a multiple choice sheet, and that is actually what's marked. The question paper is not marked at all. It is only the multiple choice sheet. Now at Teach It Right, we do use something called an optical reader. That is what scans over the multiple choice sheet and picks those marks up. And that is a skill. Children have to be able to demarcate the answers correctly and accurately. And I think, you know, certainly something that they wouldn't do very often at school. How often does a child put something down in their books and then, oh, actually, I've got to transfer that over somewhere else? It just doesn't happen. But interestingly, one of the things that we want children to be is very, very shrewd, very astute. And the way that they can do that is by actually saying, well, I've got opposites. I'm doing opposites. Here we are. We've got these questions here on the left. You can see how they're laid out, 3 on the left, 3 on the right. And now that I know I'm doing opposites, I'm going to do it straight onto my multiple choice sheet. So I'm going to go to my separate sheet. Here is how it would appear. And I'm going to do it straight onto here. Rather than working it out on my question booklet, as well as doing it on the multiple choice sheet, that can save you valuable seconds. So let's just have a little look at the first one. So the first one, of course, is hit and miss. So I would mark hit with a horizontal line. You use your pencil, and miss. And it's quite small. I think it's a little bit unkind sometimes how small it is, but that's just the way it is. And that's how the children would record down their answer. So I'm just going to read some of the questions in the chat. Can the children in the exam use the question sheet to make notes, workings out? Yes, they can. So on the question sheet, you can do what you like. You can circle things, you can underline things, and certainly when we get to comprehension skills, that's a very important strategy. But on the multiple choice sheet, you are only allowed to mark the answer. So if, for example, you make a mistake and you say, well, actually, no, it's not hit and miss. You must rub it out and then put what you believe to be the right answer. Not cross it, because otherwise the optical reader will pick those marks up. So I think it's just worth talking a little bit about that. Now, of course, at Teach It Right, we will use the multiple choice sheets. We will get them familiar with that. I have put a link in the chat for you all for the GL assessment familiarization booklets, and they are brilliant. Don't use them yet. Hold off using them yet. We've got a lot of content to get through, a lot of exposure to the question types and understanding how to do them. And then when we feel the children are ready, of course, we will be doing more tests, more mock exams with the students. But I always feel knowledge comes first. I've seen it too often where children are given loads of tests very early on and they don't really understand what they're doing. They don't understand the questions. They don't know what they look like. And it really does demoralize them, I feel, in terms of their performance. So hold off on practice tests. We obviously assess them regularly within the sort of 5-week period, but don't start testing them too early. That's my advice, but I think you obviously know where your child's at in terms of their abilities as well. Okay. Right, let's just have a quick look at these. I don't think we've necessarily got time to go through all of them, but this is a sort of a Reading Boys version now of the antonyms. So you can see there, you've got the word on the left and you've got to fill in the right letters. And those letters that you're given give you a little bit of help. They give you a little bit of guidance on what it might be.
What I would say, Chris, is there's a lot of anxiety about speed at the very beginning. And at this point in time, try not to worry too much about speed, but try to focus on using the techniques that we teach, because the speed will come later. But at the moment, the focus is on, do we understand actually how to do these questions?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you to the people having a go in the chat at some of these, which is great. Some of them are a little bit more tricky than others. Number 3 is an interesting one. It's actually furnished. So bare, as in a bare room, furnished. But I say, well done for giving those. All the ones that you've put in the chat are correct as well. Yeah, ball and whisper, not easy. Lovely.
Is it whimper?
Whisper.
It could be whimper, couldn't it?
Oh,
So
it could be whimper.
Question.
Yeah. What we tend to find with Reading Boys, they have the letters underneath and you have to choose the right letter to go into the gap. So you would have to sort of rule out the ones that you know wouldn't work. But lovely. Right. I'm going to talk to you a little bit now about a question type which did appear this year and has done for quite a few years in terms of GL assessment, and it could appear within Reading Boys as well, and that is compound words. So just to talk to you a little bit about compound words in terms of the background. So these are 2 words put together to make one. Now, just some very simple ones: cup and board to make cupboard, foot and ball to make football. Now, of course, we know they're not going to be as easy as that in the exam. They are going to be more challenging. Now, there have been a lot of arguments around sort of challenging whether words are compound words or not. But all you need to really think about is it's just 2 words stuck together to make one. But when you blend those words together, they phonetically need to make sense. So if I said, for example, red raw, if you blend it together properly, it becomes redraw. So sometimes phonetically they don't work when they're separated, but when you blend those words together, it should obviously spell a compound word. Another example might be feet and her. Well, feet and her, if I blend it together, spells the word feather. So compound words can be quite difficult. I remember one year the word seething coming up. Not many children spotted that. See and thing. Difficult, not easy. But again, on the multiple choice sheet, the children will have 3 words and then 3 words, and their job is to find one from each group that blend together. The one on the left always comes first. So there's not a case of mixing them up so you don't know what order they're in. The three on the left come first, then it's one from the right. So I've just got some examples here for you just to have a quick look at. Sorry if it's a little bit blurry, but I'll try and do my best by reading out what they are. So you've got far, see, at, sun, are, and den. And if you put see and sun together, you get the word season. Number 54, we've got be, can, and fin, I think that is. And then we've got ward, less, and at. Now, compound words can be very small. Let me give you a couple. Me and at. Meet. That's a compound word. This one is be and at for beat. Another one might be so and me for some. So they don't have to be very lengthy. The children just have to be able to try and spot them. And then we've got adaptable, adapt and able. And then testing my knowledge here. I think I've worked all of these out. Let me just check what this one will be. Oh, that's a nice one. Like that one. Cotton, cot and ton. So we will provide you with a list of compound words, and it sometimes is a case of just having to learn these. I do think they're good fun. I think children can also use their own reading books to find examples of compound words, and I think just being exposed to as many different, what I would kind of call obscure combinations of words that you never would have believed it was a compound word.
My
but they
favourite
are.
is do and me.
Oh, Tone, well done, Lou. Yeah. And actually, what you will find with some compound words, and Lou's just mentioned do, I immediately thought of nation, as in donation. So you will find, and even with words like the word back, there are lots of words that could go with back. Background. Backlog. Back up, backwards, wards.
And then they do trick ones, like they might put king and then the spelling's wrong, backing.
Absolutely, Lou. Yeah, perfect. Another example like Lou's just given there would be thinking. Think and king. Well, obviously, you can't have the two Ks together. So lots of little things examiners will do to try and put them off the scent, but knowing compound words is important. In your booklets, there are some more for you to have a little go at if you'd like to, or get your child to have a go at, and really just enjoy the process of trying to combine two words together to make one. Is there anything else, Lou, about compound words you want to mention?
Just number 5 there is a good question because it shows you what can happen with the stress of a word. So when you say it one way, it's permit, so the stress is on the per. The other way, it's permit, and the stress is on the mit. So it's not just the spelling. It can be the stress that's put on the word that really gets the children. So the more you do, the more you get used to it. And vowel changes, the sound of vowel changes often, vowel sounds often changes as well.
Lou, can I now pass over to you just to talk a little bit about swapping words?
Yes.
This is a very, very old question type that GL do produce and have put into the exam before. But again, Louise will just explain what the concept is behind it.
Yeah. So I think this is one where a knowledge of how words work in the sense of vowels, nouns, verbs, a knowledge of that helps you with this sort of question. So swap two words. In each sentence, two words have to change places for the sentence to make sense. Select the two words. Underline the two words which need to swap places. So the example is, the problem of skilled workers is becoming an increasing scarcity. Now that sentence is grammatically correct in that it's got the right type of word in the right place, but it doesn't make sense. The meaning doesn't make sense. So although it's grammatically correct, there is no meaning. So we've got to firstly read the sentence as it's written and decide what it should say to make sense. So how do we do that? Well, often substituting the two words can help the children decide what will make grammatical sense. Trial and error is the best technique if a child can't decide which words must swap places. After changing two words, the pupil must test that the sentence is correct. So we've got the problem of skilled workers is becoming an increasing scarcity. So we've got the problem and a scarcity. So I would bank on those two words being swapped. So I have to try it out. The scarcity of skilled workers is becoming an increasing problem. And now the sentence makes sense. And I think I said right at the beginning, one of the things verbal reasoning was about was checking that we know how to put words together in order to make good sense of what we're actually trying to say. And I think these are good questions and very old-fashioned, as Chris said, for that reason. But a knowledge of what a verb, a noun, etc. is will help, because usually you're going to swap like for like.
Thanks, Lou. And I think you're right. I think it's all about sentence structure as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
And knowing
how
that,
sentences work.
where verbs will come. I mean, can't be a sentence without a verb, but understanding sort of where words fit together, where adjectives might go, where nouns might go. And they're made more difficult. And I would say for that one particularly, is probably more challenging than most because of the vocabulary that's chosen. So
Yes.
A word like scarcity, would a child actually know what the word scarcity actually means? So yeah, lots of practice
And
on
I
those.
think this is where, if you don't know the words, a knowledge of what a verb, noun, etc. is helps, because increasing is an adjective and you've moved it now, but I don't think there's another adjective there that it could swap with. Oh, it's
No.
with skilled, but that wouldn't work.
Yeah. We've got more of these if you would like to give these ones a go. These are in your booklet and you're more than welcome to play around with those and again, get your child to have a go. We're going to move on though to the next question type, which is called reshuffled sentences. And there's a bit of an overlap with the one that you've just been looking at with Louise, but you have to reorder more words. So the idea being that you're given a sentence and there is a superfluous word. There is one word that you don't need. Now, these were introduced, the first time we ever saw these were actually through the company CEM. Now, CEM no longer do paper-based tests. They only do online testing. So they are the Centre of Evaluation and Monitoring. They've moved around universities. I think they're in Cambridge now. But they only do online tests. They used to be in Durham, and I think they then moved to Cambridge. But what has happened, even though reshuffled sentences was something that they introduced to the system, GL Assessment have also included them as part of their bank as well. So how do the children approach it? Well, they firstly need to read the sentence in terms of how it's written. Now, that can sometimes tell you what would make sense. Your brain is very good at sort of reorganizing the words to sort of, oh, right, I think this is what it should roughly say. And then it's a process of elimination. So you actually cross out the words that you have used, and it should leave you with an unnecessary word. That word will not fit into that sentence. Doesn't matter how much you try, it will not grammatically make sense. What we often find as well is that the word that is not required has a direct link to the sentence. So let's just have a little look at this example. So it says, allowed slipping, swimming is not the around running pool. So after just reading that, I would say running around the pool is not allowed. Something like that. Okay, so I'm going to start with running. So running, we said around. Around what? we're going to run around the swimming pool is not allowed. And slipping is the odd one out, or the word we didn't need. Interesting, though, of
Notice
course.
you went for the verb there, Chris.
Yeah, I did. Yes, that's right, Lou. I did.
Interestingly, I would have gone for is not. And I'd
Right.
have started with is not and thought, what is not?
Yeah.
Which just illustrates that there are more than one way of doing it.
Yeah. And Lou and I have talked about this quite a lot, actually, about what words you might potentially go for first of all. Very often within a lot of these sentences, there are also pronouns. So like she, they, and you would often go for that, followed by the verb. But again, it's a bit of trial and error. And I think for children, it's also generating a little bit of stamina with a lot of these questions. They might try something that doesn't work. It doesn't quite work out for them. And I think children at this age need to be prepared to say, well, okay, it doesn't matter. I didn't quite work out what the sentence is. I'm going to try something else. I'm going to try again. And I do believe that's really important for doing well with any verbal reasoning questions, not only verbal reasoning, but having that tenacity, if you like, to keep going.
One thing I've always found helpful with that sentence type, Chris, is teaching the children that the words am, is, was, were, and are verbs. It's the verb we use most in our language, more than any other verb, and it's the most irregular. So if you have a word like play, I play, you play, he plays, she plays. So it's regular. But with the verb to be, it's the verb to be that we're talking about. It's I am, he is, he was, we were, they are. And the word be doesn't appear, doesn't even raise its face until we'll get to the future tense and we say will be. But it is the verb to be. So they don't recognise am, is, was, were, are as verbs.
Thanks, Lou. Refuffled sentences, as I say, does need practice. It's not something a child can necessarily, they can do it on the day, but you can imagine the more you do of those, the better you're going to get.
And the speedier.
And then the quicker. Yeah, absolutely. One of the things we do get asked a lot about verbal reasoning is the time management side of it, and how long should a child take for a question like that. The feeling with a lot of verbal reasoning is it's usually around 30 seconds, and that would be probably applicable to something like that. If I go back to the compound words that I was discussing with you earlier, you'd be looking at more 10 to 15 seconds to make that choice. So it's very dependent really on what you're doing. When we look at the code questions with you, they do take longer. They just, there's no way you're going to be able to do them in 10 or 15 seconds. But I think also having the confidence, if you like, to say, I can't work this out. I've been on this one for quite a long time. I've got to move on and get my marks elsewhere. In the 11 plus, no question is worth more than 1 mark. They are all 1 mark questions. So I think that's also something to remember to discuss with your child, that there is no advantage to spending loads of time on one specific question if you are finding it a little bit more difficult. Okay, Louise is now going to talk to us a bit more about a question type which, again, is a very popular one, is either odd 1 out or odd 2 out. I must admit, in terms of GL assessment, it is more likely to be odd 2, where they give them 5 words. But Lou, I know this is a sort of a big part of sort of general knowledge entering the system a little bit, isn't it?
It really is, yes. And that is the problem, because we do say you need a wide general knowledge for this exam. And this is one of the questions where it really shows up. The more you do, I think, if you do a few with your children, the more you understand the opportunities that you can have in real life for expanding that general knowledge. So there's the obvious ways, like, looking at an atlas, playing
finding out which are the capital cities, what are towns, but it can all be done, a lot of it can be done incidentally. So if you're traveling somewhere, starting to look at the names of places in the car and saying, is that a city? Is it a town? What is the difference between a town and a city? And what's a capital? Somebody asked me this weekend, a lot of children had no idea what a capital city was. What are the names of countries? And all that can be just done when you're walking along, maybe going for a walk, looking at the names of trees. Do you know what that flower is? Lots of different things like that. We had one once where this week actually, wasn't it, where it involved the word bypass, and the children hadn't got an idea what a bypass was. So again, when you're traveling, there's loads of stuff that you can just do when you're just being a family, and everybody can join in and get your ideas from the actual questions themselves. Things like baby animals is another good one. Spices is one that comes up quite often. There was one recently, again in the test, that came up, and it was about where trees grow, and the children didn't know what an orchard was. So if you go fruit picking, you know, it's something that you need to be alive to, vocabulary, throughout the whole of this year, and sort of try and, you may already have it, but if you don't, arouse in yourself an interest and an enjoyment of words. Because if the whole family can join in, it becomes a much less stressful experience. And the same with general knowledge. Use it as a fun thing. Grandparents, if you have them handy, are very good at this. Put them on that sort of job. They can be very good. So when you do odd one out or odd two out, if it's odd two out, the two that are odd may well be connected themselves, but not connect to the other three. Or they may be odd to each other as well as being odd to the three that you're looking at. So odd one out or odd two out. This one we saw this week in a test. It was plateau, peak, summit, top. Oh, and you've added cliff, Chris. Right. And when I did it, a lot of the children put their hand up and said, what's peak? What's peak? And I said, we climbed the mountain and we reached and they went, oh, yeah. So there's the story again, awakening their understanding of the word. So you read the words and firstly, think about what each one means. If there are one or two that you don't know what they mean, don't panic, because sometimes you know the three that go together and then you've got the answer. Linking three words together can help identify the one word which is not required. So that's what I'm saying. If you're lucky and you can link three together, if you don't know the meaning of the fourth and fifth, if it's five, then you don't have to worry about it. These questions can involve having a good general knowledge, for example, knowing male, female animals or animal young, geographical understanding, flowers, herbs, spices, etc. A typical question could list a group of animals: cat, dog, mouse, and fish. All the animals are pets, but only one lives in water, so the fish is the odd one out. In the more challenging their questions, there may appear to be more than one theme if the question contains homonyms, words with a double meaning, and those really can throw children if they don't think of the double meaning. I've left you to think about that first one for a while: plateau, peak, summit, top, cliff. We're looking for 3. If anyone would like to type that one into the chat, I'll give you just a minute or so.
So as I mentioned earlier, these can be odd one out or odd two out.
We've now got odd two.
I've made it odd
Chris.
two. Yeah, yeah.
And I've helped you a little bit. There we go. Cliff and plateau. So peak, summit, and top, obviously connected, and plateau and cliff. But you can see how tricky they make it, because you might summit the cliff, or you might come to a plateau on it. So, you know, there are little links that will try and distract you. Okay.
Thanks, Lou. Really good. And again, everyone, if you do want to have a little, more of a go at some of those types of questions, there are some within your appendix.
A little
and
plug
pleased to have a
here,
go at
Chris,
those.
as well. Sorry to interrupt.
That's
For
okay.
book club, I'm hoping that my next book club will be on non-fiction, where I'm going to try and infuse the children to flip a little bit more through a variety of non-fiction sort of stuff that would help them with their general knowledge.
Thanks, Lou. Going to move on now to the next question type. This one is referred to as multiple meaning. The idea behind this one is that children are given sets of words in brackets, and they have to identify the word that could mean both and go into both sets. I think it's all about asking themselves the question really about what those words have in common. What's the commonality of those words? What do they mean? Do they have another meaning? But what we tend to find with these kind of questions is children will often go for a word that could go into one set of brackets, but they don't always find the word that can go into both. So it's really important, and well done if you've had a go at this one in the chat, to identify the word that can go within both. Now, of course, with this one, if we look at the words, we've got world and globe, soil and ground. So some of the words may well go into one, but it does have to go in both. And of course, the answer is earth. Louise mentioned earlier about also homonyms. There are, of course, homophones as well. Homonyms are words that sound the same, but have lots of different meanings. Homophones are words that sound the same, but are spelt differently. So if I said peace, as in piece of cake, and then peace and quiet, they sound the same, but they have a different spelling and different meaning. And that comes up a lot in the 11 plus. It really is something they really do drive home. I know it's an objective within their national curriculum as well to teach homophones and make sure children can distinguish between words like profit and principle and principle. But we do need to build that knowledge up for children. So if it does come up within the 11 plus, they're not caught out. So there's not a lot more really to discuss around those question types. The only thing I would say is that, of course, it's using the words on the multiple choice sheet, of course, because they can then decide, well, which word goes into both. And I think having a good vocabulary and a good word knowledge. And hopefully one of the things we've emphasized to you this afternoon is having a knowledge of words is really, really going to help. It's going to put them in such a good position for something like the 11 plus. I think I've said this in the past before, but if I could sort of squeeze the thousands of kids that we've successfully got into grammar school all together and say, well, what do they have in common? I think the commonality is that those kids were willing to learn words. Those children who, not say refuse, but just don't really want to build their vocabulary, they do find this exam difficult. And I guess that's the harsh reality of what we're trying to.
And I think there's a reason why we do this week's workshop first, isn't there, Chris? Because I've written in all my reports that this has to be ongoing throughout the year. You can't think, oh, we're not doing verbal reasoning now. It really needs to be on throughout the whole of the year so that they can get the vocabulary that's required.
Thanks, Lou. We're then going to talk to you a little bit about something called verbal classification. Now, there is a massive overlap really with things like odd ones out and multiple meanings and things like that. This is both from GL, but also Reading Boys as well. Verbal classification is a question type that could be there. Is there much more to add really, Lou? I guess just how these look really, just having sort of 3 words on the left and finding a word that goes in that group.
Yes, and again, using elimination if you need to narrow down your options to get your best guess, not to just randomly guess. We do teach the children to do that. Think, well, it can't be that and it can't be that. So if you didn't know sprint here, if you've thought to yourself, well, run, walk and stroll are all about me being on my feet, I can eliminate drive. I can eliminate sail. I could possibly, if I argue that that ride, I'm going to be in a vehicle or on an animal or something, I'm down to ski and sprint. And although I'm on my I'm using my legs. I'm not literally on my own feet. So using that elimination technique really helps them to think rather than just randomly, oh, I don't know the answer to this, I'll choose that one.
One of the things we value hugely with all our staff, and our tutors are amazing individuals in ensuring this happens, is giving that explanation, explaining how you've got to an answer. And I can't emphasize that enough for you as parents as well, that when you're going through questions at home, don't just feel it's a case of sort of just doing them, ticking them, right, we're done. Do have conversations around, well, that answer is achieved because of this. Now, what we try and ensure, certainly with a lot of the materials that we use, there are explanations there. Our homework videos, which Mr. Lloyd, Luke Lloyd, has been creating vigorously over the last few months, are also invaluable. So you can watch those back to hear how those answers are achieved. And I think hopefully you found them beneficial if you have accessed those already. But we will continue to do those right the way through the year because we know how valuable that is. And I would worry if it wasn't any other way. But I think explaining it, describing it is really, really important. And someone having a go. Thank you so much for having a go in the chat. I've tried to sort of give you a few kind of thumbs ups and well done, because you're giving us a really good go this afternoon. I appreciate it's a long workshop and a lot to listen to and absorb and take in. But thank you for sort of having a go and giving these questions a good pulse.
That last question, Chris, has just made me think a little bit about what we've said before about little and often is really helpful with verbal reasoning. So if you look at that one with rhyme, rhythm and tone, you could just play a 10-minute game where you say, right, we're going to write as many words as we can that are about music. And just write as many words as you can in 10 minutes, go through them. Oh, what's that? What's that? You might have cassette player. You know, you might have some instruments, and it starts to branch out. And next time you can say, oh, let's say how many instruments, and talk about the instruments. What is a bassoon? Or what's this instrument made of, as opposed to that instrument? It spreads, and you can do it in little chunks, but the children do remember these words. So if we imagine a word like bassoon, it might stay in their memory, and it's just a short thing that you've done, but it's just adding to the richness of what they know.
Louise, thank you so much. We move on to another question type. This one is called hidden three-letter word. So let me just give you a little bit of a synopsis on how this works. Children are given a sentence, and then there's a set of letters in capitals. And from those sets of letters, there is a hidden or a missing three-letter word. That is what you need to work out. What is that missing three-letter word from the letters in capitals? Without the sentence, they would be very, very challenging. But what the sentence does is, of course, puts it into context for the children. So what the children must do is read the sentence, and obviously they need to do that in their heads. I do find sometimes, of course, when we work with children in the classroom, often we'll get them to do it out loud so others can hear and we talk about them. It is also important when you do things at home, do also encourage children to be able to do things in their heads. Because in an exam situation, and this might sound a fairly obvious point, but they can't do it out loud. They can't read it out loud. And sometimes children need to do that to sort of comprehend what's going on, but do encourage them to do things in their heads as well. So the cat scratched him with his, what would he scratch him with? He's going to scratch him with his claws. Now, one of the questions we got asked earlier was, can they write things down? Well, in the question booklet, you will have bits of blank page, and if you think, here, look, I've got this big bit of white page here that I can scribble in. So I'm going to write the word claws now, because spelling is going to be really important here, and then I'm going to eliminate the letters that I was given. So I've given a C and an S, and then I'm left with the word law. Now, if, for example, the child didn't know the word and they couldn't work out what three letters were omitted, they could go to the multiple choice sheet and slot in those three letters. Now, they can go anywhere. They could appear at the beginning, the end, the middle of that word. But that could be a way of, or a bit of a comfort blanket to utilize those three-letter words on the multiple choice sheet to help them. What we tend to find as well on these, it's really important they're crossing out the right letters to give you the three-letter word. An example I remember a few years ago, they gave them the word brilliant. And if you didn't cross out the right I, it wouldn't have spelled ill. So the children got a little bit confused. So again, really important that they're thinking logically about how to do these. So this is what they would look like. You are given the sentence, and then underneath you can see the answer options. And the letters in bold is where the three-letter word has been taken out. There's only 4 of them on the screen. I wondered whether you'd like to give these ones a little go. So read the sentence. Some of you might just spot it straight away, and children will do that as well. They don't need to write the word out and cross the letters out, but of course they just need to be careful that it does spell an accurate word. Well done, everyone. Excellent. As I said earlier, I did put the link into the chat for where we've taken these materials from. So I will just put that in again if anyone arrived later or I missed you. So there it is again. So that's the GL assessment free materials for verbal, non-verbal English and maths. And just to give you examples this afternoon, this is where we've taken quite a few of those. So I would say probably they're slightly easier than the actual exam content, but at least it gives you a little bit of a flavour on what they actually look like. Superb. Right. We've got answers for all of them already. So let's just quickly go down through, make sure we know what they were. So his favourite food was, a bit of an unusual one, I guess, that it is their favourite food, but cabbage. So bag was the missing three-letter word there. The car's something in the bad weather. So I always tend to read beyond the letters that I'm given to give me that clue. So the cars, what did they do in the bad weather? What they like to be doing? They're going to be skidding. So skidded. So kid is the three-letter word. He's something for more space in the room. So if you look at the letters that you're given, what would you do if you wanted more space? You might plead, you might, but you're going to beg. So he begged for more space in the room. So the three-letter word missing there is egg. And the morning was spent something the garden. This one was a little bit more tricky, but it's ear for clearing the garden.
The clue there, of course, is that the ing is likely to come last.
Actually, yeah, that's a really important point. And of course, even with the ED on that one, exactly the same as Lou said, and the ED there actually, they will come at the end. So it's looking at little clues like that, little prefixes, little suffixes that will give them that little hint.
EIAL is sure. Yeah, stop it.
Sorry, I missed that.
I think it was.
That's okay. I think we were, we were just, I think it might have been related to another question, but thank you so much for having a go at those in the chat as well. Really appreciate that. Right, Lou, I'm going to hand back to you now to just talk a little bit about the question type where you have to move a letter from one word to another word to spell 2 new words. And I think if you don't mind also talking to our parents a little bit about your thoughts on kind of little words and building that vocabulary as well.
Yeah, I thought I'd just give my free tips, 5 tips for learning spellings, strategies to learn spelling.
Thanks, Lou. Yeah, that would be great.
I'm finding it hard to read this. It's very small, so you might have to have a willing parent to read it out for me. But anyway, let's try. So, that's better. This letter type is called move a letter. In these questions, one letter can be moved from the first word to the second word to make 2 new words. It's really important that children remember that the letters must not be rearranged and both new words must make sense. Find the letter that moves and mark it on the answer sheet. So our example is we've got pound and we've got to remove one letter and put it with or to make a new word. It gives you the answer. So often you can see it immediately. The children will see it immediately and remove the U and make it our. It's not as easy as it looks with those short words, is it? Because they don't always think about where to put it. But this is why I like them, because they are a good example of how it's testing the way letters are put together. If the child didn't know this one, I would say, right, take the P out. Does that work? No. Take the O out. Does that work? No. Take the U out. Ah, yes, it works. So go through each letter logically until you find the one that you think will leave a word behind. And then the same policy with the going to the word or. Take your U, try it at the beginning, obviously is not going to work, put it in the middle. If you can't see it, write it. Often the children can't actually see it until they put it on paper themselves. Okay, so can we look at the next page, Chris, please? Thank you. So move a letter. Perhaps you'd like to have a go at these. I haven't seen them, so I'll try and do them as well. Ooh, some people have done it before me. Ooh, that's...
Well done, everyone. Some great answers coming through on the chat.
Yeah.
So I know you've made this point already this afternoon, but yeah, just knowing those little words, isn't it? You know,
Yes,
your 4-letter words, 3-letter words.
I
It's
think
quite important.
increasingly we're getting more emphasis on shorter words, aren't we, than we
Yeah.
used to have.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so I haven't done the last one. I've just finished the air and steak. I think that's what I've got. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so just for your information, I've got buy, has, moan, dot, clap and steak. I hope you agree with me there. Looks like yes. I think I've missed one, haven't I? Anyway, hopefully you've got it. So we've got U, H, O, picking flat. So we've got cold and
There we go.
buy,
Yeah.
wine and has, flat and moan, sick and dot, grin and fair, mine and clap. Little bit tricky, that one. I was looking for mice, to keep mice, and that happens quite often, doesn't it, Chris?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, air and steak. And again, some tricky words there. A lot of the children may not know air, H-E-I-R, and steak can be quite confusing for them if they're spelling it in the wrong way.
Back to that sort of homophone knowledge again, Lou, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So going back to, yes, it is. Going back to the short words, as Chris said, we're increasingly get a lot more short words now. I think it really came home to me one day when we heard the word earn. And I thought, whoa, yes, there's some really challenging words, even though they're short. One game I've thought was quite a good idea is if you have Scrabble or Bananagrams, to use your tiles, turn them upside down, and then choose 3. And with those 3, can you make a word? If you can, you score a point. If you can't, you take another tile and you keep going until you make 3-letter words. And every time you make a 3-letter word, you get a point. And if the 2 of you do it and race it or take it in turns, you're going to eventually end up with a winner. I think that game could then be used on 4-letter words and 5-letter words in the same way. I just sort of made that up in my head. And I think there's a lot of ways you can do this that some of you will instinctively just think, oh, I know what we could do. We could do it this way and that way. But games are definitely the best way to teach these things. And again, little and often is a really good idea. A lot of the children do remember the phonics they learnt in year 1 and year 2. A lot of children have forgotten them, and it's a really good idea. I try all the time to remind them of some of the rules that they learnt. For example, if you have mat, then the a is making an a sound. It's making it sound. But if you put magic E on the end, it changes from its phonic sound to its name A and becomes mate. Now, some children remember that and apply it, and there's lots more things like that. Other children don't. So when you see it, it's worth pointing out. Again, just talking round words and how they work.
Lou, thank you very much indeed. We are sort of creeping towards the end of these question types now. So, and then we'll spend a little bit of time at the end just going through a couple of little games and activities that we think certainly are really good for vocabulary building. So please do stay with us. As I say, we are creeping towards the end of this workshop, but hopefully you're still there, haven't disappeared anywhere. And we'll go on now to talk to you about the next question type. So, this has a bit of a link with the last one I talked to you a little bit about, with sort of missing letters, I suppose. But this is called insert the letter. And the principle behind this one is you are given a set of letters, and then there's a letter that goes in the middle to finish the first word, start the second word. The same letter is also inserted into the other gap to finish the first word and start the second. So what could go wrong? Let's talk about what could go wrong in these. Children may well spell 3 words, 2 words, or 1 word, but it doesn't actually spell all 4. Often there may be words in there that they're not quite sure about. They don't know the meaning of that little word. I know we've talked before in these workshops about the word earn, for example, URN, and children not actually knowing what an earn is. And there's so many words that we come across in our teaching where we go, yeah, we will need to spend time explaining to the children what that means. And then if it comes up again, hopefully they'll remember it. As always, lots of you in the chat firing the answers, giving these ones a good go, which is absolutely great. There's only 3 there. Just to also point out, sometimes in the actual question booklet, they may not give the answer options underneath. They might just give the questions, and then they have to look at the multiple choice sheet to see what the answer letters are. So even though here you can see the answer options underneath, that is not always the case. So it's just to point out, they might just give them the question and then they need to use their multiple choice sheet to help them. And of course, you don't expect the children, of course, to be going through all the letters of the alphabet. It's far quicker to use the 5 answer options and work out which one works and slot it in. And hopefully then they'll be able to work it out. So we have a little look at number 8. Some of you in the chat already giving me that answer. Of course, it is C, because it's the D that goes in there for word, den, find, and dice. And you might talk to the children about the dice as in the noun, to roll a dice, but you might also talk about the dicing up as in the cut. Number 9, as you can see, I'm dithering a little bit because I'm trying to work out the answer myself, make sure I know. We have got there. Which one's that one? See what you've got in the chat. 9, we've gone with P. Yes, it would be for loop, peak, weep, and pull. Number 10 is K for rook, kick, oak, and kind. I expect for a lot of children, they may not necessarily know what a rook is. Now, when we often talk about building vocabulary, we often talk about imagery as well. And I would be very tempted if I was talking to a child about that, and we were learning about a rook, is actually to show them an image. Because I tend to find with so many words, it doesn't always mean a huge amount if it is just a word on a page. But if I show you a picture of a rook, you are more likely to retain it. You're more likely to remember it. Now, a resource that we found many years ago, which we know is still out there, which is absolutely fantastic, is something called Mrs. Wordsmith. And this is about learning words in a comical way. So they joined up, this company joined up with a team of illustrators from the film Madagascar. Some of you your children may have watched that film. And the idea would be that they give them a word. So I don't know, putrid, for example. And they would then show them a comical picture around that word. And I think children tend to remember that quite well. And it's a very good way of building and developing their vocabulary. The vocabulary which Mrs. Wordsmith does is also very much adapted to something like the 11 plus. And used in schools across the land. So if you do want to look that up, it's called Mrs. Wordsmith, and a very good way of learning words. Anything else, Lou, to say about insert the letter?
No, not about insert the letter, just a general comment that has just been going through my head as I'm sitting here, that I've been talking to my children this weekend about looking at their mistakes. It's very hard for children at this age to look at their errors. So I always say, look at what you got right and say, well done me, and give yourself a big pat on the back. But then where is the place you're going to learn most? And the place you're going to learn most and to help you to improve is to go to your errors. And I think, again, that's something that's really helpful. If you can't do it every week, all of the errors, but if you just pick 3 or 4 that you think will be helpful and just have a little look at those errors, they can learn an awful lot from those. Thanks,
Lou. In the chat, someone's also mentioned about watching TV programs like Lingo. Brilliant. Do love that. I do love that program. Really good fun. Countdown's another really one. I love Countdown. Those kind of wordy ones, and easy to replicate at home. You know, give your child a set of 9 letters. What words can they make from it? And we'll talk a little bit more actually at the end about some of those kind of games that you can do. But thank you very much for suggesting that in the chat as well. And again, can I just repeat what I said earlier about you contributing to this workshop and giving your ideas and your thoughts? It really does make a massive difference to us. I'm going to leave this now with Louise. Sorry, Lou, I'm springing this one on you a little bit, but this is analogies.
Yeah,
and it's one that does come up. And what I've done on the other side, I've only done 2, but just 2 little examples of analogies there.
Yeah, okay. And so in these questions, find the 2 words, one from each group, that will complete the sentence in the best way. Mark both words on the answer sheet. So it says big is 2, and you've got the choices small, orange colour, as wide is 2, apple, red, narrow. So what I teach the children, that is 2 means is connected to. So I ask them often just to write that above it when they first learn these. So big is connected to. So we have to find a connection. And then as means in the same way. So big is connected to whatever. In the same way, wide is connected to. And if they get that firmly entrenched in their head, it really, really helps, because they must have the same connection. So big is to small. Well, that's a good one, because it's an antonym, isn't it? Big and small. Big is to orange. Well, oranges can be big, but they can be big, small as well. So I'm not quite sure about that one. And big is to colour. I'm going to eliminate that one. So I'm now going to have a look and see in the same way, can I find the answer? And it's wide is to, and the opposite is narrow. So there I've got it. But for me, the clue is, or the learning really is to remember that is to means is connected to, and as means in the same way. And writing that down for them to revisit is very, very helpful. So two for you to have a go at. Look is to eye, blink, see, as listen is to hear, tone and noise. And high is to low, far, big, as deep is to full, shallow water. So I've got look is to eye. Well, I look with my eyes. I do blink my eyes, and look is to see. So it's a synonym. So I've now got to get the same connection here. So look is to see. When I look, I see, or it could be what I do it with, because I listen with my ears. I look with my eyes, listen with my ears, but ears isn't there. So look is to see, as listen is to hear. And then I've got high is to low. That's a definite connection. It's an antonym. Have I got deep is to? Shallow. So there we go. Of course, the difficulty might there be shallow. So I might try any other options if I'm not sure of the word shallow. Yes, I think what Chris is saying here is that whenever you get something like that, think where would I have been able to teach my child that? So even if you go on holiday to a beach, or as Chris has used, a swimming pool in your hotel, you can be doing vocabulary. Taking your brother or sister in the shallow end, or yes, you can stay in the pool, but don't go out of the shallow end, and those things. It's everywhere. General knowledge vocabulary is everywhere. A walk to school, we can do it.
What we tend to find with those as well, Lou, don't we, that children often will identify a link, but it's got to be the same link with both pairs.
Yes.
And that's where they can fall down a little bit on that.
And that's why I emphasize in the same way.
Louise, thank you so much. We now get to our final question type in terms of the word related ones. So if you weren't here right at the beginning of the workshop, you may have heard me say that we made a decision this year not to teach all the verbal reasoning question types in 2 hours. We thought that might be a little bit overwhelming. So we've dealt with the word related ones. I was counting them up earlier. Let me just count them again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 variations that we've gone through. Or 12 different types of word questions. So that really covers them off. We haven't left any out. And the last one that I wanted to talk to you about is probably my favourite. I don't know why. I just think it's slightly, I don't know who came up with this particular question type. I used to work for GL Assessment, and I did have quite a bit of involvement with some of the analogies and things, but this one's quite quirky. So I'm just going to go through this with you. I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger because I'm conscious it's quite small. So let's just have a little chat about this one and how it works. So in these sentences, a word of 4 letters is hidden at the end of one word and the beginning of the next word. You need to find the word that falls between the two. So it's not just a 4-letter word on its own. It has to come between 2 words. Does the sentence matter in terms of what it says? No, it's irrelevant really. And how do you get quick at them? Well, it's about identifying 4-letter words. And this is another one. We talked about it earlier, where you can go straight to the multiple choice sheet. And once I know what I've got to do, I can scan down between the gaps and hopefully spot those 4-letter words. Louise has talked about it already today, but knowing little 4-letter words is really important. So I often do an activity with students that I've worked with in the past about, is this a word or have I made it up? So for example, I might give a child veto and say, is veto a word or have I made it up? And then it just encourages children to sort of question if they've heard the word, they've seen the word, do they know that 4-letter word, and some very simple games that you can play with 4-letter words. is where you give a child a four-letter word. So let's just do a couple here. So we'll start with veto, and then we need to think of a four-letter word then beginning with O. So I'd write underneath, let's write oven down, for example. And then another four-letter word beginning with an N. Right, let's write down near. And then a four-letter word beginning with R, rove. And you keep going. So you could set a timer, you could have a minute each and see how many words you can write down, who does the most, but then have a discussion around, are they four-letter words? How are they spelt? Sometimes as well, I think with four-letter words, not only can they appear within a question type like this, but also the ones where we were inserting the letter, where we were moving a letter. So it really helps just to develop that vocabulary. And then you could maybe move on to five-letter words, play a similar game. This is also a brilliant question type just to do with two reading books. And I do it as a page race. So a child has a book, you have a book, you shout out a page number, so 21, race to page 21, and it's the first person to find a hidden four-letter word on that page. Now, from my experience, there's probably always a hidden four-letter word on every page. One of the most popular ones, of course, is sand, because you've got and you can imagine that kids really enjoy that, and then you could do it, I don't know, first to 5 points or something like that. But it's just a good way of practicing this particular question type. So you don't need anything. You don't need lots of examples of sentences with hidden words. Just use a reading book. And of course, it's all about children recognizing, is it a word or not? So in this example here, we know the answer is mend, but how many children might think that R-A-L-L is a word? Looks like it possibly could be, but it isn't. And again, I think just having that word knowledge is really crucial here. But again, from a speed perspective, go to the multiple choice sheet, scan down through the gaps and find them. So we've got tail there. On this one, we've got pool. On this one here, we've got swan. There we are, Louise Swan there.
None
And we've got
offence, Chris.
span as well. So great fun. Great fun to do. So that's hidden four-letter words. And of course, at Teach It Right, we will spend time working through those types of questions. Right, we did say we were going to finish by Louise and I talking to you a little bit about word games. So we've mentioned about bananagrams. I think one of the most popular games in the world, bananagrams now. It's incredibly simple. The idea being you take out 21 letters, turn them all over, and then it's a bit like Scrabble without the board. And the idea is to get rid of those letters by joining words together. They can't be spelt backwards, of course. They've got to be spelt either going vertically or horizontally. And it's linking those letters up. If you can't use a letter, you dump it back in the banana and then you whisk out, I think you're penalised for that. You whisk out 3 more. And just really good fun. So if you haven't come across that game before, with Christmas maybe looming a little bit, shouldn't really mention Christmas at October, but you may well think about potentially some presents around word games, and you can pick those up in W.H. Smith's, or actually Amazon tends to be slightly cheaper if you're interested in purchasing those. Lou, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about word wheels and words from words.
Yeah,
But
but
again,
we like to use these as lesson starters, don't we, Chris?
Yeah.
So yes, just making, as you can see, it's pretty self-explanatory. A wheel with 10 spaces, 1 letter in the middle, and letters outside. And every word must have 3 or more letters. You're creating words, and the children have a target. You can see that on the bottom, but it's just paper and pencil. How many words can you make? I think you can vary the rules as well, can't you, Chris? Do you have to use that D in the middle?
I think you do, yeah. The
have to
principle
start
behind
with
this
it.
one is you have to use the D every
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
But I think there is also, and I wish I could spot it, I will try and do it later, but there is a 9-letter word there as well that you need to try and spot. I remember vividly when I was a child, I used to My mum used to use the back of the local newspaper. It was called the Western Morning News, and these always used to be there. And she sort of present me with it. And I did love the fact that each time I was given one, I would try and get into the next category. So you can see there, if you got 0 to 10, it'd be okay. But if you got up to 31 to 40, it would be very good. And I just love the fact that I could go through levels like that. And I think sometimes if you just make it a bit more gamey, kids will really enjoy that. And the same applies with words from words. You know, can you challenge them and say, you know, can you make 20 words from this word?
That's one I remember having as a child. It was how to keep you quiet, give you one of those.
Exactly. And puzzle books are great for that as well. The reason for the crane was another sort of imagery thing there, just to make sure that you remember to do that within your own sort of word building at home. Putting images to words is a really good idea.
It's the same as a word picture, isn't it? When I say tell a story, but you're actually giving them the visual.
Exactly, Lou. Mary Farquhar is a lady who we've known for a number of years now. She has produced various flashcards. They are absolutely fantastic. The way that she creates these boxes of words, synonyms, antonyms, compound words, is tutors like myself or tutor companies will send through words to her, and then she will collate them together. So obviously, we do get feedback, as I mentioned earlier, about the exam and what sort of words come up. So they are very, very appropriate, quite expensive. I do think to be a little bit cautious with that, and it's entirely up to you. But we do think they're very good. I would also mention the Collins flashcards as well. They are super. I think what's really important with flashcards, whichever ones you go for, it's better to have a sentence on there so the child knows how to put it into context. And also, I think the other important thing is to make sure that they list sort of things like synonyms and antonyms on the cards as well. So you're sort of getting the most out of that product. But yeah, certainly really good. Mary Farquhar, we may well invite her into the centres during the year. I haven't invited her back since COVID, but I'm sure we will get her involved again so you can speak to her.
And this, Chris, if any of the parents haven't seen them before, was what I was referring to when I was saying, if you're using those cards with your children, rather than you asking them, giving them the box, you have, rather than you having the box, you give the children the box. And they take out a card, they tell you what the word means, and you've got to think of the word. It's surprisingly difficult. And the children really love it because they're staring at the answer and you're trying to find it. But while they're staring at the answer, they're learning that word. So their children enjoy it much better that way around, definitely.
Louise, we always like to try and be prompt, don't we? And I think it is dead on 6 o'clock. So I think
Yes.
we've done what we said we were going to do. Can I thank you for your company this afternoon and for all your wonderful tips and hints? And also a massive thank you to all the parents for coming along. We have recorded this, so we will obviously send out a link. I will just stop that now. So we've stopped.